At exactly 10:25 p.m. on a moonless night in October 1955, every clock aboard the MV Joyita stopped ticking. When rescue crews found this 70-ton merchant vessel 5 weeks later, drifting 600 miles off course in the vast South Pacific, all 25 souls on board had vanished without a trace. But what they discovered inside would haunt maritime investigators for decades. This is what really happened. The MV Joyita wasn't just any cargo ship. Built in 1931 as a luxury yacht for Hollywood movie director Roland West, she was a 69-foot wooden vessel with a cedar hull over oak frames, practically unsinkable thanks to 640 cubic feet of cork lining her cargo holds. Captain Thomas Dusty Miller, a 41-year-old British sailor, knew every rivet of this ship. He'd been running charter operations between Samoa and the remote Tokelau Islands, desperate to clear mounting debts from failed fishing ventures. On October 3, 1955, at 5 a.m., Joyita departed Apia Harbor carrying 16 crew members and 9 passengers, including Dr. Alfred Parsons, a World War II surgeon rushing to perform an emergency amputation in two. Among the passengers were 2 children and a government official. But there was already trouble. The port engine clutch had failed, forcing Miller to depart 17 hours late on just one engine, a decision that would prove catastrophic. The 270-mile journey to Tokelau should have taken 41 to 48 hours in calm seas. But as Joyita limped along on her single-functioning engine, conditions began deteriorating rapidly. What the passengers didn't know was that their ship was a floating disaster waiting to happen. The radio S range was limited to just 2 miles due to faulty wiring, a painted overbreak in the antenna cable that would seal their fate. The bilge pumps lacked basic strainers and were already clogged with debris. Most critically, galvanic corrosion was silently eating away at pipes in the engine room's cooling system. Chuck Simpson, Miller's 28-year-old American first mate, had been at odds with the captain for months. Crew members later described visible tension between the two men, with Simpson questioning Miller's increasingly reckless decisions. By the second night, October 4th, Joyita was battling 40-mile-per-hour winds and heavy swells. The single engine was laboring, and unknown to anyone on board. Seawater was beginning to pour into the bilges through a fractured cooling pipe. The first sign of trouble came when water rose above the engine room floorboards. By then, it was almost impossible to locate the source of the leak in the darkness and chaos of the storm. At approximately 9 p.m. on October 4th, the situation aboard Joyita became critical. Water was flooding the engine room faster than the clogged pumps could handle. The vessel began listing heavily to port as tons of seawater filled her lower decks. Captain Miller faced an impossible choice. He knew Joyita was virtually unsinkable. Her cork lining and cargo of empty fuel drums provided enough buoyancy to keep her afloat even when flooded. But his passengers and crew were panicking as the ship took on an alarming list. Evidence suggests that someone was seriously injured during this chaos. When the ship was later found, investigators discovered a doctor's bag on deck containing a stethoscope, scalpel, and full lengths of blood-stained bandages. Dr. Parsons had clearly been treating someone in the vessel's final hours. The starboard engine was found covered with mattresses, either an attempt to stem the leak or protect. Electrical equipment from spray as water levels rose. An auxiliary pump had been rigged between the main engines but was never connected, suggesting the crew was overwhelmed by the emergency. Most haunting of all, the ship's radio was tuned to 2,182 kHz, the international maritime distress frequency. But with their antenna cables severed and painted over, their desperate calls for help could only travel 2 miles into the endless Pacific darkness. At 10:25 p.m., every electric clock aboard Joyita stopped. The cabin lights and navigation lights were still switched on, frozen in time like a maritime tune. On October 6th, when Joyita failed to arrive at Whakahofor port in Tokelau, a massive search operation was launched. Royal New Zealand Air Force Sunderland flying boats scoured nearly 100,000 square miles of ocean for 6 days straight. Nothing. The Pacific had swallowed the MV Joyita and her 25 souls without a trace. But on November 10, 1955, exactly 5 weeks after departure, Captain Gerald Douglas of the merchant ship Tuvalu spotted something impossible through his binoculars. There, drifting north of Vanuatu in Fiji, was the MV Joyita. She was listing so heavily that her port deck rail was underwater, covered in barnacles that had grown high above the normal waterline. The flying bridge had been smashed away by weeks of pounding waves. Windows were broken, and a canvas awning had been rigged behind the bridge. But the most chilling discovery was what was missing. All 25 people had vanished. The ship's dinghy and 3 Kali life rafts were gone. 4 tons of cargo had disappeared. The logbook, sextant, chronometer, and all navigational equipment were missing, along with the firearms Captain Miller kept aboard. Maritime investigator Captain S.P. Brown, who knew Miller personally, made a statement that chilled rescue crews. Miller would never have left Joyita alive, given his knowledge of her construction. The formal inquiry in February 1956 found the vessel was in poor condition, but concluded that the fate of the passengers and crew was inexplicable on the evidence submitted. But here's where the story takes a sinister turn. When investigators calculated fuel consumption, they determined Joyita had traveled 243 miles before being abandoned, placing her within 50 miles of her destination when disaster struck. The evidence points to a terrifying scenario that began with mechanical failure but ended in something far more sinister. Author Robin Malm, who spent years investigating the case, uncovered what likely happened in those final hours. As Joyita foundered in heavy seas, Captain Miller, knowing his ship couldn't sink, insisted on pressing forward to clear his debts. But First Mate Chuck Simpson, with passengers screaming and water pouring in, demanded they turn back. The confrontation escalated into a full mutiny. During the struggle, Captain Miller was seriously injured, explaining the blood-stained medical supplies. Simpson seized control and made the fatal decision to abandon ship, taking the navigational equipment, logbook, and the injured captain with them into the life rafts. But here's the terrifying truth investigators discovered. Simpson likely spotted what appeared to be an island or reef, and ordered everyone into the life rafts to reach it. In 40-mile-per-hour winds and mountainous seas, those small rafts were swept away into the vast Pacific, leaving Joyita to drift empty for 5 weeks. The 25 souls aboard, including 2 children, were never seen again. The MV Joyita mystery remains officially unsolved to this day. As of 2012, all aboard were still declared as missing. The incident led to significant changes in maritime safety regulations, including mandatory emergency beacon requirements and improved life raft specifications. In 2012, memorial stones were erected in Samoa and Tokelau to honor the 25 vanished souls. The Joyita herself met an ignominious end. After several more groundings and mechanical failures, she was abandoned as an unlucky ship and slowly disintegrated on a Fiji beach by the late 1970s. But questions remain that haunt maritime experts. Why would experienced seamen abandon an unsinkable ship for tiny life rafts in a Pacific storm? What became of those life rafts and their human cargo? And most disturbing of all, could better communication equipment have prevented this tragedy entirely? The vast Pacific keeps its secrets. Well, 25 people simply vanished into the blue, leaving behind only blood-stained bandages, stopped clocks, and a ghost ship that refused to sink. What do you think happened in those final desperate hours aboard the MV Joyita? Could modern technology have saved them, or was this tragedy inevitable from the moment they left port on one engine? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more chilling maritime mysteries that continue to baffle investigators decades later. Next week we'll explore another Pacific disappearance that's even more mysterious, the case of the merchant vessel that vanished with 31 souls, only to reappear 70 years later with a cargo that defied explanation.